today's guest is Dr. Angela Jansen, who I was really excited to attend this because Angela's work, as I'm going to embarrass you for a while now, I'm obsessed with clothes for various reasons, right? And I think clothes are the most political thing you touch all day. Yeah? Clothes will be your contact point with international global value chains that are exploitative and extractive in various ways. Yeah? They're also a very effective means of self-expression, yeah? But they're also kind of a way that you categorise yourself or get categorised. They're all about identity. Yeah? And they're also, fashion specifically, in mainstream thinking about it, tends to be associated with developed, modern, Western economies that's all about consumer choice. Yeah? Now, I came across Angela's work when I was looking at indigenous fashions in Bolivia, and it was a very politically potent movement as well, hence the connection with the series. It's powerful innovations there. But what I found myself doing was being very surprised at the possibility of indigenous fashion. Yeah? How can someone who's indigenous from Bolivia show in a fashion show in New York? It made me raise my eyebrows. Yeah? Which showed that I had a lot of assumptions about what counted as fashion. Yeah? And I fell over that for a while, like kind of thinking about, well, how is it not costume? What counts as fashion? What counts as costume? Where does the identity come in? What's choice? What's modernity? How can you possibly say that clothes are old-fashioned, by the way? They might have been made yesterday, but they're still old-fashioned in a sense. So there's a sense in which fashion tells you what now is. Yeah? Loads of theory around that as well. But I found Angela's work specifically on decolonising fashion, yeah? And also some very excellent reflections on how universities might produce elitist structures that perhaps trivialise this manifestly political thing, which I certainly had some fights getting my work. Well, I won't talk about that, but like, the theoretical validity of something as everyday as fashion is a battle that needs to be won. Yeah? And Angela's work covered both of that, decolonising fashion and also decolonising the university structures that produce theory. So when I contacted Angela, one of the first things she said was that she didn't want to be the expert giving the talk, but rather she wanted to offer an invite to a conversation, which is precisely what a kind of, it's kind of the radical rethinking of the spaces that produce knowledge that is required. Yeah? And I'm like, great, wonderful. Right? You didn't get an abstract for this talk, you got an invitation to a conversation. Yeah? I then see the lecture theatre, and I did last week when I saw it, I think, oh, so isn't it interesting that we've got to try and reconfigure the spaces of these like elite knowledge production institutions in order to facilitate the kind of different modes of thinking about theory that we have. So, with that in mind, we would like, well, shall I hand over to you, Angela?
No,
and then you can take it from there. Very good. But what we've kind of come up with is, so Dr. Angela Jansen is here. We're also joined by Mandish Kelsey, who is just finished her master's on
decolonisation as well.
There we go. And what was it?
It was service design.
So, service design, but it involves a lot of design principles and design thinking. So
I'm actually from a fashion background, so I studied my bachelor's in fashion and ended up really questioning the systems around it, and ended up going and working in India and Peru and all of that, and Angela, and yeah.
Excellent. So the idea is that we have a discussion rather than a presentation. We've also got some people on Zoom.
Exactly. That's also who I would love to introduce. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, for having us, because I consider we are here as a group, as a collective. So, and the whole reason that I invited these people is that about a month or 2 or 3, three ago, we organized the first global fashioning assembly. And I'll tell you all about it, what that is, but rather than me talking about the assembly, is having some, at least, of the collective, some of the communities talk about the assembly. So we have Mandish, who already introduced herself, and then we have Chepkemboi. Chepkemboi Manira is based in Kenya. She is a fashion activist, and unfortunately she'll only be able to join by chat. So I'm not quite sure yet if I'm going to have to press some button somewhere that we can see what she is saying. And then we have B.B. Arthur. Oh! Yeah. So can we maybe make it
Maybe I can
bigger? And then we have B.B. Arthur. Hi, B. So B is based in Ghana, and she is also a fashion activist, but also a fashion designer, and many, many, many more things that I probably won't be able to remember. But so we are going to try, despite the challenges of this room, of this setup, and therefore of all the power dynamics present in this room, I would like to try and initiate a conversation. So anybody who feels like joining us or has an alternative of how we could set up, please join us here, join us there, join us in the middle, wherever you want, but jump in at any time. Yeah, as hard as it is, but we got to start somewhere. Yeah, people in the first row, how much you pay more? Yeah. So where shall I start? So I think maybe even with the setting, or maybe even with me, I'm not quite sure. Maybe with Mandish. But so maybe with the obvious. So I am a white Western woman who is running now for 10 years a collective on decoloniality and fashion. So let's just mention the obvious. To continue in the colonial setting, I was trained as an anthropologist, so studying material culture and more specifically traditional dress. And I did that first for my master's in Indonesia, and then I did that in Morocco for my PhD. So all the colonial narratives are implicit in my education, and let's say for the first maybe 5 years I wasn't aware, being sent to Indonesia to do field research, because that's what you do. You go to the field, you go and live with these people, and then you observe them, then you produce knowledge, and you take that with you, and it's usually only accessible to an academic audience. But to make a long story short, for my PhD, I moved to Morocco, where I ended up living for 8 years. I do have a half Moroccan Jewish mother. I have a Protestant white Dutch father. I have a Catholic American grandfather. Anyway, explains why I decided to study anthropology. But so, moving to Morocco, doing my PhD on Moroccan fashion, as all students do, I had to present my work at dominant fashion conferences, and I would always get the same remarks. It either was like, fashion in Morocco, a bit like you, do they have fashion? Or it was, oh, how cute, or how exotic, or how special, whatever, any other denigrating remarks. So I decided to organize my own conference. The very first one was in Rabat, in Morocco, and it was an academic conference. I had a budget of 2,000 euros to organize an international fashion conference. It was called the Non-Western Fashion Conference, so that was in 2012. It was supposed to be a one-off, but the 15 people that met there felt like coming home. That's their words. Why was that? Because they were all battling their own fights in their own institutions, departments, museum departments against ethnocentricity in fashion discourse and practice. I wasn't even into fashion, I was into so-called traditional dress, but yet we felt a connection. And so that initial conference in 2012 became 4 more conferences in Hong Kong, Antwerp, London, and Tokyo. But then, of course, after a couple of years, we started realizing how we're just perpetuating the ethnocentricity only just by organizing an academic conference. What is an academic conference based on? On peer reviewing. What is peer reviewing? It's basically deciding what is good and what is not good. Who gets to talk, who doesn't get to talk. So even we, continuously, we as in the community, have to, first of all, discover our own blind spots, decolonize our own thinking, our own doing, but also then coming up with alternatives. So that's what brings us to the Assembly 2022, exactly 10 years after our initial conference with 15 people in Rabat, Morocco. We organized the first Global Fashioning Assembly. Now, what was the assembly? We didn't make that up. There's grassroots assemblies around the world that are initiated by local communities, but that connect on a global scale. Thank God for the internet, because if not, it would have been quite even more of a challenge. So 1 year before, so let's say October 2021, we collected a group of people. We brought in, so the collective for Decoloniality and Fashion that grew out of that first initial conference is a global network of local communities, of local people, again, battling that dominant notion of what fashioning is and all the politics behind it. So in October 21, we brought some of the groups together and we said, how can we meet on this so-called global scale from different parts of the world, but on equal terms. But not only equal terms, on your own terms. So rather than having an event where everybody kind of like is invited to the event is hosted by the communities. So the assembly goes around, it's like a baton, or what is that thing he called? So every time the hosting of that event is passed on from one community to the other. So we started in Aotearoa, so in what we know as New Zealand, and 3 days later we ended up in Mexico, without ever leaving your seat. In Peru, sorry. In Peru. See, I was so... Sorry? No. So yeah, but how do you do that? Because it's great, right, on paper, but it definitely involves some challenges, no? Yeah. So first of all, you come sit together. First decision we made, it's not about the product, it's not about the result, it's about the process. So every month we would meet, well, initially, because afterwards we almost met every day. But initially we met once a month online, and we recorded our meeting. Not to put on YouTube, not to publish another product, but to document our own process. How do you decentralize? How do you organize an event with, at the time, initially, I think we were 6 or 7 communities in different time zones, different languages, of course. So where do you start? Organically, people take on roles. I don't know how it works, but it's magic. Somebody goes like, oh, I'll do the website. Oh, I can create the logo. Oh, I will take whatever, do the time frame. Oh, I will do funding applications. So just very organically, people take on roles. Yeah?
I had a question based on your platform. How were you able to get such support and attendance of these events if their communities are in different geographical locations?
So everything was self-governed, self-determined. So let's say, for me, I was hosting the Dutch part of the event. So I would communicate through my network, and I didn't do that because I'm not even on social media, but let's say the people I work with in the Netherlands would promote it in their network. And that goes for everybody. So let's say B was much better connected in Ghana. She brought half of Ghana with her, and everyone was there. So, but yeah, just to kind of like focus a little bit on the process, the most important thing was that everybody would decide for themselves. So we had different, we had one logo, but we had different aesthetics. We had different titles. There was always this global fashioning assembly, but then there were like subtitles or everybody could choose their own language. So we did have hosting communities, let's take Brazil, who did it in Portuguese, even though that's also a colonial language, but they chose to do it in Portuguese. And then here and there, we would get translation, like somebody would translate in English. But also, I think the importance of language, and hopefully, Chapkin Boy, you can, in the chat, share a little bit of what you have decided from January 23 onwards. And B, you also have, I think, a very interesting comment to make on language. Maybe this is a good time, because I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, in our case, hello everybody. I'm not in Ghana now, so unfortunately my Wi-Fi is good, otherwise you wouldn't be seeing me either.
That's another
So yeah, it was wonderful to be part of this. We did have something that was quite shocking to GFA. They were shocked that we couldn't choose one of our local languages, and even though unofficially we have one language that most of us speak when we're not speaking English. But the thing is that in recent times, some ethnic groups feel like that there's one dominant group, you know, the Akans, that tend to think that they are quote-unquote more important, you know, because we use kente fabric, which is Akan, our gold weights are Akan. So then they feel like if in addition to that we also use the Akan languages, then all the other ethnic groups feel like that they're not, you know, on the same, not at par with the Akan people. So just to eliminate this issue, sadly, we had to use our lingua franca, which is English. But everybody, virtually everybody who was part of our hosting community was from a different ethnic group. So it was funny that, you know, it was like, how do we resolve this problem? Once in a while, somebody would insert a proverb or a saying from their local language, you know, and then they would have to translate it into English. Or if it's a very popular one, sometimes all the other ethnicities comprehend it. But yeah, it was crazy that we were trying to decolonize fashion, but, you know, like a lot of former colonies, we are stuck with English, just like others are stuck with Portuguese and French. But other than that, I mean, we didn't have any disagreements, and we all did agree that at the end of the day, you know, it doesn't really matter. We are one people, and we need to look beyond some of these. When are we going to resolve this issue with language? I have no idea. Mind you, the languages are very different. They have no similarity whatsoever. So some are related to the Yoruba people in Nigeria. You know, some languages are like more like Hausa. There's another language where there are people. We're not quite sure where our language comes from, but I think it's related to some languages in Sierra Leone. So even though the ethnic groups are not very large, but we have languages that are completely distinct. You know, there's no way, you can't call them dialects of the same language, because when I speak Tree, somebody who speaks Ga does not understand. There was a lot of lexical borrowing, you know, that went on due to, you know, proximity living together over these centuries, but they're completely distinct languages. So, to be honest, English was the only way we could communicate amongst ourselves and with the rest of the world.
Thank you, B. In the meantime, not only Sonia Bakla has joined us from Pakistan, so it's probably late evening, I think. Hi, Sonia.
Hi.
And thank you so much for joining. And then we have, so Chapkin Boy,
Yes,
I don't know if you can read it.
I can read. So Chepkenboy has written, one of the things that came up during our GFA was the role that mindset and language plays in decolonization. During our event, we found that certain thoughts could be best expressed in Kiswahili and Kikuyu, Kenyan languages. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. As of January 2023, I am using Kiswahili language as my official language of communication. I have already started on social media because translation is easily available. Kiswahili is spoken by millions of people of Eastern, Central Africa. For example, the common language I have with Burundians, Congolese, and Mozambicans is Kiswahili. I also aim to make this language more accessible to more individuals on the continent.
Yeah, so the issue, I think, of language is not as simple as we may think, as in, oh, let's all use our local languages, because then if there's multiple local languages, then what becomes the appropriate language? But also the role of language in knowledge production and sharing. As far as I also understood from Chepkenboy, it's also, if you then produce that knowledge in English, it does become whatever available again to the academic world, but the people who would actually need access to that knowledge then don't. So it's definitely very complicated. Yeah.
Guys, thank you for this inspiring initiative. And it's lovely to hear that there's initiatives like democratizing the process, and they have like flat management structure, which is great. I just don't see until now, at least maybe, how you, because you started because you wanted to challenge the current system, right? And you said during your what you said that you are documenting more than like kind of making like advocating for your assembly or for the values of your assembly. So I didn't see until now how you are challenging and engaging with the current dominant fashion in this industry and with the system in general.
Yeah. So it's basically, it's a practice and a thinking at the same time. So within kind of like the decolonial thinking, we want, it's an artificial, when you say that, split up between thinking and doing. So what you think is actually what you do in the end. So the idea is, how do we produce knowledge? And especially, how do we acknowledge certain knowledges? For example, me coming here and giving a keynote, this setting makes you think that what I say is true. And not only do you think it's true, it's going to become a canon that then we claim goes for the entire world. So by decentralizing knowledge creation and sharing, because that's the most important thing, is how do we exchange then that knowledge? If I claim that there's only one way to do fashion that automatically affects, let's say, 99% of the world, because it's only a very small part who that actually then relates to. So it's this bringing back this relational of what we do and what we say and what we think actually affects people on the other side of the world. And yeah,
Question that maybe builds on
yeah,
that.
a little bit.
But, how do you talk about the word fashion itself and all the related words that may be the problem is? So, for example, when I was talking to Manoush at the beginning, you work with artisanal communities, right?
Yeah.
And that distinction between, and in Peru as well, so I was very interested, but that distinction between what counts as craft when you make it, so traditional dress, for example, with naively count as craft, and that is in contradistinction. It helps create the idea of fashion. So, and there are lots of other words that kind of mean fashion. So I noticed that B was wearing, is that the Chanel branding on your t-shirt?
Yes, it is.
So how
and Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, okay. So
yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is Chanel. I love I actually think that she liberated women. So I'm not thinking like African women. Like a woman, a general woman from anywhere. The fact that, the corset, the cutting of the hair, the wearing of trousers, all of those things that Chanel represents for me, as a woman and as a fashion designer. So, and this was a birthday present.
It's lovely. Art's approach. It's lovely. I noticed it immediately.
in the very short time that we have, because this is definitely, much more than we can touch upon in 1 hour, is first of all, we're not creating a canon. We're not redefining fashion one fits all. We're doing exactly the opposite. What B is going to consider as fashion, and especially as a decolonial, kind of fashion, is going to be very different from what I consider in my positionality, let's say, for the sake of it, from Holland, what I'm going to consider fashion. And so that, what we're trying to bring back is that diversity, and we're all, it's a very hip and fashionable word now, diversity, but accepting our differences, accepting that everybody defines for themselves or within their local communities what fashion is. We're not trying to come up with a new definition, and especially not a universal definition. And then what we do, so again, everything that we're sharing here today is knowledge that we don't own, but that we owe. Both as the collective, we have an incredible, amazing group of decolonial thinkers that guide us in our process. What we try to do is bring those worlds together, as in this fashion narrative and the decolonial thinking. Again, there is no such thing as decolonizing fashion. I think that's another problem. We don't decolonize fashion, we don't decolonize anything. We bring these discourses and these words together, because that's what you come in. How do we use words that have such, such political and therefore colonial meanings? Is one of the suggestions is using or focusing on the verb, on the act of fashioning. It's the Global Fashioning Assembly. And then, of course, what's in a word? Well, there's a lot in a word. So by focusing on the act, by focusing on the process, we try to move away from the noun that has to come to represent that consumer product, that product of capitalism, and therefore a whole system based on inequality, discrimination, and exclusion.
So also it's about giving the platform as well, like just the act of providing this platform to other systems, other stories. Other stories. I mean, they're not other, but they are other. And so, for example, I work with the Quechua communities in the Sacred Valley, and that wouldn't be considered fashion, because they have their own dress, they have their own traditions, but for them that is their identity. And they usually wouldn't have a platform. But through this, we gave them a platform to showcase their culture and tell their story with authority. So that in itself is the act of decolonizing the fashion system, the dominant fashion system that we have right now. So,
can I ask a question that builds on all of these, I think? What I'm really interested in is how you engage with the media and kind of media discourse and the construction of fashion. In all of these different contexts, through different kind of media.
The more questions I get, the more I'm like, oh my God, there's so much we didn't say, there's so much we didn't address. But
did everyone hear that question?
The media, the role of the media.
How do you engage with the media from this basis?
Because I don't even know where to start. But first of all, so all the communication is done by all the collectives themselves, by all the communities themselves, in the words, in the language that they choose to use. But how do because what I'm thinking of, but that again is from my positionality, is the funding part. When you apply for funding, that comes with criteria. That criteria is usually the visibility. How much did I get from my money? So in this case, we got 24,000 euros of funding, and then just the justifications, the report, is all based on analytics of social media. Again, I'm not even on social media, but it's how many clicks, how many reposts, how many, I don't know. I think our report, at least 50%, was the justifications of who reposted us and who addressed it or who did it on there.
And I mean, media is such a big umbrella as well. So I think what we really tried to do, I was part of the production team, so what we really tried to focus on was the language we were using, the imagery we were using. So it wasn't perfect. It wasn't this clean cookie cut vision that this is what we're doing. This is a in-process thing, and we're learning as we're doing as well, and that's what we have to be authentic about, really.
So I was thinking more about the kinds of dominant narratives and discourses about fashion and what is fashion. And obviously I'm speaking just from a kind of Western perspective here, and I'm thinking about the role that magazines like Vogue play in determining what is understood globally to be fashionable at any one time. How do you even consider that it's worth engaging with trying to kind of share the work that you're doing to change?
Not necessarily the mainstream. If they want, they're most welcome to join. We're not going to discriminate.
Can I just repeat that question?
Sorry.
If it's the fair summary, well, Saffron, do you want to repeat it? Sorry. I was looking for the mic that can go around.
No, so my question was more about do you see a role for your collective and assembly to challenge dominant narratives in, I suppose, in the kind of media that support global fashion, capitalist global fashion? So how do you feel it's worth engaging with them or not?
So for me personally, it isn't. I'm also not from a fashion background, and I'm also not in that world, if you like, or in that conversation. But what we do try to do at best is to claim space. Because as you say, Vogue defines fashion globally, it's not the case. They think they do. Yes, they think they do. So at best, what we're trying to show is that they're not. And if they could please make a bit of space, they are valid in where they exist and what they want to do, but we claim space for other narratives. And therefore for other ways of body fashioning. But what I was going to say also, when again you apply for funding, they have a certain idea of what fashion is. So you have to meet their criteria of what fashion is. And so being part of that system, so we have operated outside of the system for 10 years, meaning we had no funding. We were an informal network, we weren't registered anywhere, and we didn't apply anywhere. In October 21, we became a foundation to apply for funding. And now we realize how even there, then we, for example, don't fit in all the categories because we're not academe and we're not art or design or culture or whatever. So it's on so many levels then that you need to kind of like push back to the system. This idea of excellence, right? A lot of funds are there to promote, in our case, Dutch design. Well, we're trying to decentralize, so we don't want to focus on the Netherlands, and we don't want to focus on this idea of excellence. So, yeah, it's on all levels that you push back, but they're not, how do you say that, our target group, if I may say so. We're at the service of the communities and creating a dialogue, a conversation, and against burnout, how can we support each other? Because we're all pushing back in our individual areas in the world, how we can create that network to support each other and to push back together.
Yeah, I can see 4 hands up, and I confess I don't know the order. We've got RP, you've already had a question from the lead. That's right. One question there, and then Nikolai at the back as well. So start looking. Yeah.
Hi, I'd just like to ask, what the implicit goals of the Global Fashion Assembly is? Is it just to showcase what fashion is on different parts of the world, or is it to open sort of this consumption of fashion from other people that I as a Filipino may appreciate a fashion that's available in Morocco, and then are you promoting my consumption of Moroccan fashion, or you're more of no, you appreciate the fashion from far away?
Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe we can ask Sonia.
Yeah.
Sonia, have you heard the question?
I would love you to repeat it, please. I did hear a little bit.
Okay. What's the goal for the Global Fashioning Assembly with having a global platform when they engage with a larger community or a global platform? Are you promoting consumption of other forms of fashion? and then you draw the line between appreciation and appropriation? Or would you rather that other people recognize that fashion exists in other contexts?
So the thing was that when we came together, we realized that everybody has a different understanding and a different context of practicing fashion. And that is what makes the assembly come together and assemble into a body. Because what this assembly, to my understanding, was doing was understanding that different perspectives and meanings and functions of fashion and decolonization are welcome, and you're allowed to do it in your own way, at your own pace. In Pakistan, which is where I'm from, we saw a transition. The post-colonial culture became the neo-colonist. So they were behaving exactly like the colonists, but they were not white. And we realized that there's a mindset issue. The other thing we realized is that to be at par with a world group, we must understand what decolonizing fashion or textile or whatever the curriculum, your syllabus, whatever it is, but what decolonizing is. And in our video, we had people from different walks of life showing how they had made a difference to their field by looking at the indigenous culture and how they were practicing it. Now, they were some artisans who were not using the term decolonial, and they were not also using the term fashion, but they were working towards fashion because they were working in textiles, which gets consumed as clothes often, as accessories often. And so I think what this assembly achieved in terms of what you're asking in the global consciousness of fashioning was that we realized that everybody has a different route, and that's a welcome story because we need to change our mind, we need to open it completely and unlearn what we've learned about what fashion is. She was just talking about Vogue, and we have to unlearn. I myself am a designer, and I wanted to be in Vogue, and I even got there, and then came along Angela and the group, and I realized, well, I don't really need to be there. And my whole consciousness of how I view it, and also the other thing is we realize it's an inner process. Our mindset has to change. It's a mindset change, it's an emotional reaction. It's about not thinking that you can lead and say that, oh, this is right and this is wrong. It's about blurring that line between right and wrong. I hope I've made some sense for you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Does anybody else online want to come in there? Or?
I was also wondering if we should show the video.
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah. There are just a couple more questions.
Yeah, sorry.
Nikolai's stuff, so I'm going to leave you to the end if you don't mind. But there's a question here. Yeah.
I have a question regarding more like status quo and cultural appropriation. So when you decolonize fashion, a lot of fashion is also related to status quo, especially where I'm from in East Africa. How do you break down those barriers, especially knowing that status quo can come from brands that do accessories like watches, sunglasses, jewelry, and how do you break cultural appropriation when you do decolonization? Because if I see a bunch of white people wearing dashikis, I don't think that's the correct thing here to do, So how do you stop cultural appropriation while also decolonizing fashion and stop social quo?
Maybe has something to say. Did you hear the question, B?
No, please, I didn't. Could you kindly repeat it?
It's about the status quo and cultural appropriation. How do you counter cultural appropriation in the process of the decolonizing? How do you address those issues?
How do we address those issues about cultural appropriation?
Yes, in the process of decolonization.
Let me see if I can. I'm trying to see how to answer this question. First of all, well, let me see if I understood the question. In Ghana, I think the one thing that most people know about Ghana usually is the cloth, the textile kente. And I don't think we don't have any copyright. Most people know it's Ghanaian, but it's personally, I don't have any problems with people using the fabric as long as they know that it came from Ghana. So you see that during our presentation, if Angela and Mandesh, if you remember, I did mention that especially the African American community or the Black diaspora at large have sort of adopted that fabric as their, as their own. So it's a symbol of Pan-Africanism and Afrocentrism. And if you watch a lot of the movies, probably Black Panther and any other movies that are made, with a strong Black theme, most often than not, you would see a bit of kente, represented somewhere in some form. So personally, I'm happy about that. I don't really have problems. But in current, in recent times, I've heard certain people object to it. But then you see, as we discussed during our presentation, when you start trying to trace the origin of certain things, actually, it turns out that there was a contact between several cultures, and we probably also got influenced or learned it from somebody or borrowed certain things. So sometimes I'm like, is it really ours? Did we also copy it? Were we influenced? And I don't have any issues with that. As I said, even as a fashion designer, people look at other people's works and then you could say they plagiarize. I think as long as credit is given, due credit, if you acknowledge the culture from which you're borrowing, that's fine. But like some people are suggesting that folks should pay an amount of money, for using kente. I'm not sure how that is practically, feasible. It's not possible. And also, as a fashion designer, I can't tell you honestly that in my practice, I've never been influenced by designs from China or India or Belgium. I think that as an artist, I think there should be some amount of freedom so that, you should be able to get inspired by other people's art, whether it's their textile, whether it's their paintings, whether it's the sculpture, whatever, their food, as long as when it's time to give due credit, you do. That's it. That's my personal opinion. But I can find you a whole lot of, whether they're academics or fashion designers or regular folks on the streets of Accra who would disagree. So it's a very dicey thing. This is just my personal opinion. And mind you, I'm a mixed race person, so I tap into both cultures. I'm used to, I grew up in a home with a Ukrainian mother and a Ghanaian father, so for me it's normal. Everything I do, I have 1 foot in Europe, 1 foot in Africa. So that's how I live. So my perspective on this is that it's okay, it's fine. Just give due credit. Recognize the people from whom you are borrowing or who inspired you, and then something new always comes when several cultures meet.
I think that is very important. If I can just kind of like emphasize that, is that communities are not necessarily agreeing. So it's not like the Ghanaian hosting community, we're all in agreement. The whole idea is to initiate those conversations. So it's not conversations only on the global level where all these communities are conversing together, but I think Sonia in Pakistan was an incredibly good example how due to or following assembly, she created her own collective and has already organized an assembly like on Pakistani level, if you like. So that's the idea, is that we are having these conversations and there's not like an end destination, as in this is where everything will be decolonized and we'll all be happy and joyful. So it's an ongoing conversation, basically.
But it's very personal.
And it's very personal.
Question.
Very personal, actually.
Yeah, I just wanted to read the lawyer's comment.
Yes.
Chakongo is written, we also don't have copyright around our kanga cloth or our bead accessories, though there are some communities that are currently in court to ensure their heritage items are copyrighted. The subject of appropriation is quite complex to address. Here it is a sign of respect to wear another's heritage pieces, but this depends on the occasion and respective rules around it.
Okay,
And power
one
dynamics.
question in the middle there. I know you've had your hand up for a while, so make it brief.
I just wanted to ask, in places that have been colonized, how is the fashion represented there? Do we focus on how it was pre-colonial life? Do we focus on the influences of colonization? How is it represented, and what do we focus on, I guess, in particular?
That's a very interesting
Well,
question. Can I just repeat that for everybody? In places that have been colonised, kind of what counts as what is the focus of that word, fashion? Is that what do you look at how it was before or how it is now? Is that a fair summary? Yeah.
So I think a big misconception about decoloniality, or one of the main critiques of decoloniality, is this idea of essentialism, of going back before. So there is no going back.
Yeah.
And actually, from a certain perspective, there's a going forward, because ancestors were before us. They have made the path before us, but that's another conversation. But so, again, the focus is on the conversation. How do we move forward? How do we create, if you like, in an ideal world, better futures? So, and we're not all going to agree, even within communities, we're not all going to agree. So I don't think there's either a starting point or an end.
But I think also it's like, who is deciding what is better? And we do need to ask the communities and give them that space to, determine for themselves what is better, what is preferred. And we're not erasing history. So the communities that I work with, they don't want to keep everything from whatever was happening before colonization. They want cars, they want concrete housing now, and we've had to constantly have a dialogue with them. They're like, okay, what are your needs? What are your desires? Just we have to meet you in the middle. We're not going to tell you what you need. We're not going to tell you what is better for you. You're going to tell us, and we can just only support that process. So
that's the design principle.
So those are like the design thinking principles. Yeah.
Okay, I'm reminded that UCL hour is 10 to the hour. You have one more question here? Are there any other? I can send around the video afterwards. That's
or we can play it while you're leaving.
Yeah. Okay.
My question is around solving real world problems. So in all of these conversations about fashion, the fashion represents people and decolonizing fashion, where does that conversation around how fashion could be used as a tool or a way to solve real world problems in this community, particularly conflict-prone communities, communities where women are marginalized and maltreated or mistreated? Where does that sort of conversation fit in? Because I think that from a developing country perspective, that's something that will be of great value to people, because a lot of people do not appreciate these conversations around fashion because they see how it applies to a problem in their life and their community.
I can give a very simplified answer to that. I don't have an answer, but in the way that I'm doing my work with these communities and the organization I work with, it's about providing economic opportunities, first of all, and also some training and skills that they can use to then forward their own businesses. So it's not that we're trying to solve all of the social and political issues in Peru, it's just that we're trying to give them the same kind of opportunities that they would have if they had those things provided by the government. So the communities we work with, the women have never gone to school. They've only lived in the mountains doing farm work. But they are very talented artisans. They know how to weave really intricate designs by hand with alpaca yarn. So we're using those skills to really let them build their life and the future for their children and their communities. So we're really trying to support the cultural sustainability and give them a little bit of an uplifting, really. So,
okay, I'm genuinely I'm gutted. I'm going to have to end this now, but it's 5-2. I like to think this is the start of a conversation.
Yeah, there's no way we can all like summarize this in 1 hour. So there's lots and lots and lots of things we did not address. This is kind of like the first peek.
And maybe I can send around the information about the collective.
Absolutely,
and people want to get in touch.
Absolutely, because one thing that we do, so we have the assembly, which is biannual, but we also have the monthly conversations, and that's basically, what keeps the conversation going. Once a month, anybody who wants can join. We pick a theme, we pick guests. We pick materials, and then we have a conversation about it. So, yeah.
Terrific. I'll do that. And I just thought I'd add as well, that what I really got out of Angela's work was I kind of went from what can this event of Indigenous fashion do to tell the fashion industry what it's doing wrong, if you see what I mean, which I think is where a lot of the questions have come from. But then the more I read Angela's work and Arturo Escobar's work, which I'm assuming this idea of an autonomous space and a process behind decolonisation, I think that's kind of where you're coming from. But there is so much to talk about in terms of exploitation, in terms of extractivism. It is the start of a conversation. But I'd like you to join me in thanking our presenters. Thank you so much.